Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan, where we try to dig a little deeper into Islamic traditions and see how they apply to modern life.
Yes, exactly. And today we're going to be exploring a topic that might seem a bit um, unexpected to some listeners: Islamic business ethics.
Yeah, not exactly the first thing that comes to mind when you think of, uh, ancient religious texts.
Right, but you'd be surprised how much wisdom and guidance we can find on this topic, even in these early sources.
So where are we looking for this wisdom today?
Well, we're going to be diving into Sahih Muslim, specifically Hadith Book 10, which focuses on business transactions.
Business transactions. Okay, so we're talking about buying and selling, contracts, negotiations, all that good stuff.
Exactly. It's a fascinating collection of sayings and teachings from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that provides a detailed framework for ethical conduct, even in the realm of commerce.
It's like taking a time machine back to the bustling marketplaces of early Medina.
Mm,
You can almost smell the spices, hear the bartering, see the silks and dates piled high.
absolutely. It's a vibrant scene full of energy and activity. And what's really interesting is that amidst all the hustle and bustle, there's this strong emphasis on ethics and morality.
It's like they're saying, hey, even in the marketplace where profits are at stake, we can't lose sight of our values.
Precisely. The core values of honesty, transparency, fairness, and compassion that underpin these hadiths resonate just as strongly in our modern globalized economy as they did back then.
So it's not just about avoiding shady deals, it's about creating a system that's just and equitable for everyone involved.
Exactly. And what's remarkable is how these ancient principles offer practical guidance for navigating the ethical dilemmas we face in our own businesses and in our lives as consumers.
Okay, so enough with the broad strokes. Let's get into some specific examples. I was particularly intrigued by the hadith that outline certain forbidden transactions. It's like they're laying down the law, saying these are the red lines you don't cross.
Right. These aren't just arbitrary rules. They're designed to safeguard both individuals and the market itself from practices that could lead to exploitation or instability.
So they're trying to create a level playing field where everyone has a fair chance to succeed.
Precisely. And they do so by addressing some very specific scenarios that were common in the marketplace at that time.
Okay, like what? Give me an example. What kind of shady business deals were they trying to prevent?
Well, let's start with these intriguingly named practices: mulamasa and munabata. They sound like exotic ingredients you'd find in a spice shop, don't they?
They do. Mula masa, munabata. Roll those words around on your tongue. What do they actually mean?
Well, they refer to two rather dubious ways of conducting business that were prevalent at the time. Imagine two merchants in the marketplace, eager to close a deal. Instead of carefully examining the goods and agreeing on a price, one simply touches the other's garment, maybe without even looking at what's being offered.
Wait, so they're making a deal based on a touch? That's it. No haggling, no inspecting the goods.
That's mulamasa in a nutshell. It's essentially agreeing to a transaction based on a fleeting touch without proper inspection or informed consent.
It's like buying a used car without looking under the hood, or clicking buy now online without reading the product description.
Exactly. And Munabata takes this a step further. Picture two merchants standing apart, each throwing a piece of cloth at the other, and boom, a deal is struck based on where those cloths land, without either party even seeing what they're getting.
Wait, what? Throwing cloth? It's like a game of chance, but with real economic stakes.
Precisely. It's chaotic, unpredictable, and ripe for abuse.
No wonder the prophet PBUH addressed these practices. It's like a recipe for disaster, disappointment, and disputes. Where can we find this addressed?
Hadith 3612 uses vivid imagery to condemn these practices, emphasizing the importance of transparency and informed consent in business dealings.
So it's not just about getting a good deal. It's about ensuring that the deal is made fairly with both parties understanding what they're getting into.
Exactly. The Prophet, PBUH, clearly understood that rushing into a transaction without a clear understanding of the terms and conditions could lead to unfair outcomes and erode trust in the marketplace.
It's like he's saying, hey, let's slow down, take a breath, and make sure everyone's on the same page before we make a deal.
Right. And this principle applies just as much today as it did back then. Think about how many financial products or services are shrouded in complex jargon or hidden fees, or how often we're bombarded with marketing messages designed to manipulate our emotions rather than provide clear and accurate information.
It's like the modern equivalent of touching a garment without knowing what's underneath.
Exactly. The spirit of these hadiths reminds us to be discerning consumers, to ask questions, and to ensure that we fully understand the terms of any agreement before we enter into it.
Okay, so Mulamasa and Munabatha, those are out. What other kinds of forbidden transactions did the hadiths address? There was the one that involved throwing stones, right?
Yes, the throwing stones transaction. This practice involves setting prices based on chance, much like gambling. Merchants would literally throw stones into a designated area, and the position of the stones would determine the price of the goods being traded.
So instead of negotiating a price, they're just rolling the dice.
Essentially, yes. It created an element of randomness and uncertainty, making it impossible to establish a fair and stable market value.
Sounds like a risky way to do business. What kinds of things were they throwing stones for?
Well, the hadith doesn't specify, but we can imagine it being used for anything from livestock to grain to everyday household items.
Wow, so imagine going to the market and instead of asking how much for that loaf of bread, you're watching the baker toss a handful of pebbles onto a grid.
Exactly. It's a far cry from the way we're used to doing business, but it highlights the importance of establishing clear and fair pricing mechanisms.
It seems like they were concerned about protecting people from exploitation, especially when it came to essential goods.
Absolutely. Islam encourages calculated risk-taking in business, but it draws a clear line when it comes to essential goods and services that people depend on. You can't gamble with people's livelihoods.
And this idea of not gambling with people's livelihoods, that's still relevant today.
Absolutely. Think about the world of modern finance with its complex derivatives, futures contracts, and algorithmic trading. Are there instances where these instruments are used for speculation and excessive risk-taking, potentially creating bubbles and crashes that harm the broader economy?
Ooh, now you're getting into some deep waters.
Yeah.
That's a question for the economist to ponder, but it's definitely something to think about.
The core principle here is to ensure that financial instruments serve the real economy, promoting stability and equitable growth, rather than becoming tools for reckless speculation and profit-seeking at the expense of others.
Okay, so no mulamasa, no munabada, no throwing stones to set prices. Got it. What else is on the forbidden list?
Well, there's another one with a rather unusual name, Habal al-Habala. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but it refers to the practice of selling something you don't actually possess yet.
Like selling something that doesn't even exist.
In a way, yes. In this case, it involved selling the unborn calf of an unborn calf.
Hold on, you're selling the offspring of an animal that hasn't even been conceived. That's next level speculation.
It is, and it was forbidden for the same reason that the other practices were. It creates too much uncertainty and risk. Neither the buyer nor the seller can be sure of what they're getting, and it can easily lead to disputes and unfair outcomes.
It's like promising something you can't guarantee you'll be able to deliver. I can see how that could get messy.
Exactly. And again, this raises some interesting questions about our own economic systems. Do we see similar practices today where people profit from selling things that are essentially promises or potential future gains without any guarantee of their actual value?
Hmm. Yeah, you've got me thinking now. I'm going to have to keep that in mind the next time I see a pre-order for a product that's still in development.
It's a good reminder to be cautious and to make sure we understand what we're really buying into.
Okay, so we've talked about these forbidden transactions that involve deception, uncertainty, and excessive risk. But the Hadiths also address another set of prohibitions that focus on fairness and respect in the marketplace. I was particularly struck by the ones that forbid interfering in transactions that are already in progress.
Yes, these hadiths highlight the importance of ethical conduct even in the heat of competition. It's about recognizing that a healthy marketplace depends on trust and cooperation, not just on everyone trying to get the best deal for themselves, regardless of the impact on others.
So no swooping in and stealing someone else's deal.
Exactly. Hadith 3617 and 3618 make it clear that it was considered unethical to try and outbid someone who was already negotiating a price or to make a competing offer without the other party's permission.
It's like having a code of conduct, ensuring that everyone has a fair chance and that deals are conducted with respect and transparency.
Right. And this principle extends beyond individual transactions. It speaks to the importance of building a strong and ethical business community where people can compete fairly and with integrity.
Now, here's one that I found particularly interesting and a bit surprising. The Prophet, PBUH, was particularly wary of city dwellers acting as brokers for their desert-dwelling cousins.
Yes, that might seem counterintuitive at first. After all, it seems like a helpful thing to do to connect people who might not have access to the same markets. But the Prophet, PBUH, recognized the potential for exploitation in this situation.
So instead of being helpful, it could actually be harmful.
It could be. City dwellers were likely to have more knowledge about market prices and trends than their desert-dwelling counterparts. This information asymmetry could create an unfair advantage, allowing the city dweller to profit at the expense of the less informed desert dweller.
So it's like insider trading, but with livestock and dates instead of stocks and bonds.
In a sense, yes. It's about preventing those with more knowledge and access from taking advantage of those who are less informed.
It's about ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate in the market and benefit from its potential.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting the vulnerable, it's about upholding the integrity of the marketplace as a whole. When people feel like they're being treated fairly and that the system isn't rigged against them, they're more likely to participate and contribute to the overall prosperity of the community.
It's amazing how these seemingly ancient teachings about business ethics are still so relevant to the challenges we face today. It's like they were ahead of their time.
They were, and it's a testament to the enduring wisdom of these principles that they continue to resonate with us centuries later, guiding us towards a more ethical and just way of doing business.
I think that's a great place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground already, and I'm eager to dive into the more positive side of Islamic business ethics. The things that are encouraged and praised, not just the things that are forbidden. But we'll save that for our next deep dive.
I look forward to it. So you ready to move on to some of the more positive aspects of Islamic business ethics?
Absolutely. We've talked about all the don'ts, the forbidden transactions, the red lines you shouldn't cross. Now, I'm curious about the duties, the things that Islam actually encourages when it comes to business.
Well, one of the most fundamental principles is honesty and truthfulness in all business dealings.
Okay, that makes sense. Honesty is always a good policy.
Right. But it's more than just a good policy in Islam. It's a core value that's essential for building trust and creating a fair and equitable marketplace.
So it's not just about being honest yourself, it's about creating a culture of honesty where everyone feels like they can trust each other.
Exactly. And the hadiths provide some very specific guidance on how to cultivate that culture of honesty. For instance, Hadith 3662 emphasizes the importance of being truthful about the quality and condition of goods being sold, even if it means revealing flaws or defects.
So no hiding the dents and scratches on that used car you're trying to sell?
Precisely. It's about being upfront and transparent, even when it might cost you a sale.
Because in the long run, building a reputation for honesty is more valuable than making a quick buck.
Exactly. And I think Hadith 3663 really drives this point home. The Prophet, PBUH, advises people to say there should be no attempt to deceive during a transaction.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like a verbal contract, a commitment to transparency and ethical conduct.
And imagine the psychological impact of those words spoken aloud. It creates a sense of accountability for both the buyer and the seller.
It's like saying, okay, let's make this a fair and square deal where everyone benefits.
Exactly. It establishes a foundation of trust and mutual respect, which is essential for any successful business relationship.
Now, there are a number of hadiths that address the selling of fruits before they're ripe. Why was this such a big deal? I mean, we see unripe fruits for sale all the time in supermarkets today.
That's a great observation, and it highlights how the context of these teachings is important. In the time and place of the Prophet, PBUH, selling unripe fruits was problematic for several reasons. First, it was a form of deception. Buyers couldn't be sure of the quality or taste of the fruit until it had ripened, so they were essentially buying a promise, not a tangible product.
And as we've already discussed, promises and speculation were not looked upon favorably when it came to essential goods like food.
Exactly. Second, selling unripe fruits could lead to disputes. Imagine buying a bushel of dates only to find that half of them never ripened properly. It could easily lead to accusations of fraud or unfair dealing.
Right, because you're essentially selling something that's not yet what it's supposed to be.
Precisely. And third, in a society where food security was a real concern, selling unripe fruits could be seen as wasteful. Some of the produce might spoil before it could be consumed, which was a loss that a community struggling to feed itself could ill afford.
So it's interesting how this seemingly simple act of selling unripe fruit touches on a whole range of ethical concerns, from honesty and transparency to wastefulness and the responsible use of resources.
Exactly. And it does raise some questions about modern-day practices. We see unripe fruits in supermarkets because they're often shipped long distances and need time to ripen. But how much do consumers know about the conditions under which that fruit was grown and harvested? Were pesticides used? Was the labor fairly compensated?
It makes you wonder if those seemingly perfect fruits on the supermarket shelves are hiding some ethical complexities that we rarely consider.
Right. Just because something is readily available and looks appealing doesn't mean it was produced ethically or sustainably. The spirit of these hadiths encourages us to be mindful consumers, to consider the origins of our food and the impact our choices have on the environment and on the people who produce the things we consume.
Okay, moving on to another intriguing detail from the Hadiths, the prohibition against selling an animal with a tied udder.
Ah, yes, this one always stands out. It's a vivid example of how the Prophet, PBUH, sought to protect buyers from deception, even in the seemingly mundane details of livestock trading.
Can you elaborate on that a bit? What exactly was the issue with selling an animal with a tied udder?
Well, imagine a farmer wanting to sell a goat or a cow for its milk production. To make the animal appear more productive, they might tie its udder tightly, making it seem full of milk, even if it's not actually producing that much.
So it's like a visual trick, making the animal look more valuable than it actually is.
Exactly. It's a form of deception, plain and simple. And the Prophet, PBUH, was very clear that such practices were not permissible in Islam.
What I find particularly interesting is that the Hadith not only gives the buyer a 3-day return window if they discover this deception, but it also requires the seller to provide a measure of dates along with the returned animal.
Mm.
Why the dates?
That's a great question. The dates serve a dual purpose. First, they compensate the buyer for the inconvenience of having to return the animal. It's like a mini refund for the time and effort wasted.
Ah, so it's not just about righting the wrong, it's about making amends for the trouble caused.
Exactly. And second, the dates act as a deterrent for sellers who might be tempted to engage in this kind of deception. Knowing they'd have to pay a penalty in the form of dates would make them think twice about trying to pull a fast one.
It's like a built-in accountability mechanism. It discourages dishonest behavior and creates a financial incentive for sellers to be upfront and honest about their products. It's fascinating how these seemingly small details reveal a deep concern for fairness and ethical conduct in all aspects of business dealings.
It's about creating a system where trust is the default, where people can engage in commerce with confidence, knowing that they're protected from deception and exploitation.
Okay, let's move on to a topic that I found particularly fascinating and a bit complex. The Muzabana debate.
Yes, this is where we really see the nuances of Islamic jurisprudence in action. It's a prime example of how scholars grappled with seemingly simple concepts like bartering and exchange, seeking to ensure that they were conducted in a fair and equitable manner.
So for those of us who are unfamiliar with this term, can you explain what exactly Muzabana is?
In essence, muzabana involved exchanging different qualities of the same commodity using unequal measures. For instance, imagine trading a smaller amount of high-quality dates for a larger amount of lower-quality dates, both being measured out by volume.
So it's like trading premium gourmet coffee beans for a bigger bag of regular supermarket blend.
That's a great analogy. And you can see how this practice could be seen as problematic. On the surface, it seems like a simple barter, but the unequal measures and differing quality create a gray area when it comes to fairness and the potential for exploitation.
I'm starting to see where the debate comes in. Was this practice completely forbidden, or were there exceptions?
That's where things get really interesting. The hadiths on Wizabana show a fascinating evolution of thought and interpretation among the scholars. Some hadiths, like Hadith 3693, 3694, outright forbid Muzabana, seeing it as a form of riba, or interest, which is strictly prohibited in Islam.
That makes sense. If you're essentially getting more of something in return for something of lesser value,
Yeah.
it starts to resemble lending money with interest, which is exploitative.
Precisely. But other hadiths introduce exceptions, particularly when it comes to the concept of ariya, which refers to charitable donations or gifts.
So if you're giving something as a gift, the rules of Muzabana might not apply as strictly.
Exactly. For instance, Hadith 3679 and 3683 mention the Prophet, PBUH, allowing the exchange of dry dates for fresh dates in the context of ariya, even if the measures are unequal. This suggests that the intention and spirit of the transaction play a role in determining its permissibility. If the intention is generosity and there's no expectation of material gain, then a certain degree of flexibility is allowed.
This is where I get a bit confused. Isn't all trade, in a way, about exchanging things of unequal value? I mean, I trade my money for a cup of coffee because I value the coffee more than the money at that moment. Where do we draw the line between a fair exchange and something that could be considered exploitative?
That's a brilliant question, and it gets to the heart of the Muzabana debate. The key distinction lies in the potential for one party to gain an unfair advantage over the other due to factors like information asymmetry, unequal bargaining power, or the essential nature of the goods being traded. In your coffee example, both you and the barista are entering into the transaction freely, with a general understanding of the value of what's being exchanged.
So it's not just about the objective value of the goods being traded, it's about the context in which the exchange is taking place and whether one party is exploiting the other.
Right. The Muzabana debate highlights the importance of considering the power dynamics at play in any transaction. Are both parties on an equal footing with equal access to information and the ability to negotiate fairly? Or is one party in a position to exploit the other's need or lack of knowledge? These are the kinds of questions Islamic scholars were grappling with, and they remain relevant today.
This Muzabana debate feels incredibly relevant to how we think about fair trade practices today. We're constantly grappling with questions of ethical sourcing, fair pricing, and the power dynamics between producers and consumers, especially in a globalized economy where supply chains can be incredibly complex and opaque.
Absolutely. The spirit of the Muzabana debate is alive and well in our modern economic systems. Think about the debates around fair trade coffee, for example. Consumers are increasingly aware of the challenges faced by coffee farmers in developing countries, and they're willing to pay a premium for coffee that's been produced ethically and with fair compensation for the farmers.
Or consider the issue of price gouging during emergencies. When essential goods like water or gasoline become scarce, some sellers take advantage of the situation and jack up prices, exploiting people's desperation. This feels like a clear violation of the principles we're discussing.
It certainly is. It goes against the spirit of fairness and compassion that's at the heart of Islamic business ethics. It's about recognizing that our economic activity should serve the common good, not just our own self-interest. And this brings us to another important theme that emerges from the Hadiths, the concept of land ownership and cultivation. This is where we see a fascinating interplay between economic principles and social responsibility.
I'm intrigued. How is land viewed differently from other commodities in Islamic teachings? It seems like owning land has always been a source of wealth and power.
Yes, land has always held a special significance in human societies. But in Islam, land wasn't viewed solely as a commodity to be bought, sold, and traded for profit. It was seen as a precious resource entrusted to us by God, a gift to be used wisely and responsibly for the benefit of both the individual and the community.
So it wasn't just about owning land, it was about using it in a way that benefited society as a whole.
Exactly. Several hadiths, like Hadith 3716 and 3719, strongly discouraged renting land for profit. The emphasis was on cultivating the land yourself, or, if you were unable to do so, lending it to a brother in need without expecting any rent in return.
That's a very different perspective from how land is often viewed today, where it's primarily seen as an asset to be bought, sold, and leased for profit, often with little regard for its ecological or social impact.
It is a different perspective. The Islamic teachings emphasize stewardship and social responsibility. Land ownership isn't just a right, it's a privilege that comes with certain obligations to use the land productively, to care for its fertility, and to ensure that it benefits the wider community.
What was the rationale behind discouraging the renting of land for profit? It seems like a reasonable way to generate income if you're not able to cultivate the land yourself.
There were several reasons for this. First, it promoted self-sufficiency and encouraged people to work the land themselves, contributing to the overall productivity of the community. It wasn't just about passive income, it was about active engagement with the land, nurturing it, and reaping its rewards through hard work and dedication.
It's like the saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. It's about empowering people to provide for themselves and their families.
Precisely. Second, it fostered a spirit of generosity and mutual support, ensuring that those who are unable to own land could still benefit from its cultivation. It's about creating a safety net, ensuring that everyone has access to the means of sustenance, regardless of their economic status.
So it's not just about individual gain, it's about communal well-being.
Right. And third, it prevented land from becoming a passive source of wealth for a select few, which could lead to inequality and social unrest. The idea was to prevent land from becoming concentrated in the hands of a small elite, who could then exploit those who depended on the land for their livelihood.
It's fascinating how these teachings sought to balance individual economic activity with a strong sense of social responsibility and communal well-being. It's like recognizing that we're all interconnected, that our actions have ripple effects, and that true prosperity comes from creating a just and equitable society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
And this brings us to an incredibly important point, the Islamic perspective on debts and forgiveness. This is where we see the principles of compassion and mercy applied to the realm of finance.
This is something I've always found incredibly inspiring about Islam. The emphasis on mercy and compassion, even in financial matters. It's like recognizing that we're all human, that we all make mistakes, and that sometimes we need a helping hand.
Absolutely. The Hadiths paint a very clear picture. Leniency towards debtors is not just a nice thing to do, it's a highly praised virtue. Imagine this. You're deep in debt, struggling to make ends meet, and your creditor comes to you not with threats or demands, but with offers of respite, extensions, or even complete forgiveness of the debt.
Just the thought of it brings a sense of relief. It's like a huge weight being lifted off your shoulders.
And the beauty of it is that this compassion is not just a one-way street. Multiple hadiths highlight the spiritual dimension, reminding us that God is ultimately the most merciful creditor, and that by emulating his attributes, we not only help others, but also draw closer to him.
It's like a beautiful cycle of compassion flowing from God to us and then from us to others.
Exactly. And it has practical implications as well. This emphasis on ethical lending practices is a key principle in Islamic finance, which seeks to alleviate poverty and promote social justice through fair and compassionate financial systems. It's not just about avoiding interest, it's about creating a system that supports and uplifts those who are struggling.
So it's about recognizing that financial well-being is intertwined with spiritual well-being, and that compassion and generosity are essential ingredients for a truly flourishing society. I think that's a powerful message, especially in a world where economic inequality is widening and many people are struggling to make ends meet.
It's a message that resonates deeply with the Islamic ethos of social justice and compassion. It's a reminder that our economic activities should serve the higher purpose of creating a more just and equitable world where everyone has the opportunity to live a dignified and fulfilling life.
Wow, this deep dive into Islamic business ethics has been truly enlightening. Who knew there was so much to say about buying and selling?
Right. It's amazing how these teachings from centuries ago are still so relevant to the way we do business today. It's a testament to the enduring wisdom of these principles.
It really makes you think about the impact of our economic choices, not just on ourselves, but on the wider community.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our actions have ripple effects.
So let's take a moment to recap some of the key takeaways from our discussion. What are some of the things that really stood out to you?
Well, for me, it's the emphasis on transparency and informed consent in every transaction. No more shady deals sealed by a touch or a throw of the dice.
Right. No more mulamasa or mutabata.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that everyone involved in a transaction has a clear understanding of the terms and conditions and that no one is being deceived or taken advantage of.
And then there's the prohibition against excessive risk and speculation, especially when it comes to essential goods and services. Remember the unborn calf of an unborn calf.
Oh, yes. That one's hard to forget. It highlights the importance of responsible commerce, grounded in tangible value and genuine need, not just the pursuit of profit at any cost.
And speaking of tangible value, I was really struck by the hadiths about selling unripe fruits. It's a reminder that honesty and transparency apply not just to the terms of a deal, but to the quality of the goods being exchanged as well.
Right. It's about managing expectations, ensuring that what you're selling aligns with what the buyer expects to receive, and avoiding any form of deception, however subtle it might seem.
It also raises some interesting questions about the ethics of modern food production and consumption. Are we always aware of the hidden costs and consequences of the things we buy? Are we supporting businesses that operate ethically and sustainably?
Those are questions worth pondering. The spirit of these hadiths encourages us to be mindful consumers, to think critically about where our food comes from and how it's produced.
And who could forget the story of the tide udder? It's a reminder that honesty and integrity should permeate every aspect of our business dealings, no matter how small.
It's about building a culture of trust where people feel confident that they're not being misled or taken advantage of.
And then there's the whole Musabana debate, which really delves into the complexities of ensuring fairness in exchange. It's a fascinating example of how Islamic scholars sought to apply the principles of justice and equity to even the most nuanced situations.
And it has clear implications for how we think about fair trade practices today. Are we paying a fair price for the goods we consume? Are we supporting businesses that treat their workers ethically? These are questions we should all be asking ourselves.
Absolutely. And finally, the teachings on land ownership and cultivation were really thought-provoking. They offer a different perspective on how we view and use this precious resource.
It's a reminder that land is not just a commodity to be bought and sold, but a gift from God that we have a responsibility to steward wisely and use for the benefit of the community.
And of course, we can't forget the emphasis on leniency towards debtors and the spiritual dimension of forgiveness. It's a beautiful reminder that compassion and mercy should be at the heart of our financial interactions.
It's about recognizing that our economic well-being is interconnected with our spiritual well-being, and that true prosperity comes from creating a system that is both just and compassionate.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Islamic business ethics, what's a final thought-provoking question we can leave our listeners with?
I think a good one would be, how can we apply these principles to our own lives, both as business owners and consumers? How can we make our economic choices reflect the values of honesty, fairness, and compassion?
That's a great question. It's a challenge for all of us to live up to these ideals, but it's a challenge worth striving for.
It is, because ultimately it's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and live a dignified life.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked some reflection and inspired you to think more deeply about the ethical dimensions of your own economic choices.
And until next time, may peace be upon you.